Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Napoleon's First Campaign, Part 3 by Epic History TV. So, last time we saw Napoleon win an impressive victory against Wurmser as he continued his first Italian campaign. Today, we will be continuing that campaign. I'm very excited to get into this episode in the series. If you guys enjoy this one, then please check out my Patreon. It's linked down below, and it'll give you access to exclusive reaction content. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this video.
An Epic History TV BMF Productions collaboration. In 1796, at the height of the French Revolutionary Wars, a young French general took charge of a ragged, demoralized army in northern Italy. It was his first command. Many expected him to fail. Instead, in just 1 month, he won his first brilliant campaign.
Yup, and we continue to see Napoleon rise higher and higher, and his image become more popular. He becomes more well-known throughout this entire campaign. I mean, we saw at the beginning of this campaign, Napoleon was someone who had risen through the ranks primarily based on his political connections. Now, he was certainly talented, absolutely, but a lot of the military men didn't necessarily believe in him. He hadn't proven himself up until this point. But prove himself? Well, that's what he's doing right now. And frankly, even at this point in the series, he's already proved his skill as a commander, and he will only continue to prove it even further.
With astonishing self-confidence, boldness and energy, he led his army to victory after victory, transforming the war in Europe, winning praise from a grateful republic, and forging a legend. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte's first campaign, and the dawn of a new age. August 1796. The war between France's infant republic and the coalition seems to be tipping in France's favor. In the Vendée, General Hoche has brought the 3-year royalist revolt to an end.
Yes, the revolts in the Vendée, extremely brutal, violent, bloody. This was a royalist revolt primarily inspired by Catholic and royalist opposition to the French Revolution that had been building, frankly, since the early days of the Revolution. But as the Revolution grew more radical, everyone radicalized on both sides. The people in the Vendée began picking up arms and fighting. Émigrés returned to lead them, and then you end up with a counter-revolution. And that counter-revolution in the Vendée was put down by the revolutionary government with extreme violence and extreme brutality.
This appalling civil war has cost an estimated 165,000 lives and is the bloodiest chapter of the French Revolution.
Yeah, and that's worth pointing out. I think a lot of times when we think about the French Revolution and the violence of the French Revolution, we might think of, say, the Reign of Terror, Robespierre, people getting executed for talking bad about the revolution. But if you really want to see the height of that violence, look to the Vendée.
Bourbon Spain allies with France. They will combine forces against their common enemy, Great Britain. In Germany, the armies of General Jourdan and General Moreau have crossed the Rhine and are advancing on Vienna.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering, I think, as we can see from this map, that though Napoleon is an important part of this story, and he's making himself more important, day by day, at this point, he's still only a part of the story, and maybe not even the biggest part, He's certainly not in the most important theater of the war. Now, Napoleon has a skill for making himself the center of attention, so, he's going to start making himself more and more important to the French Revolutionary cause. But, as we can see, there are other people in important positions doing very important things, pushing the Republic forward and winning these wars.
While in Italy, Napoleon's stunning victory at Castiglione has sent the Austrians scurrying back to the Tyrol.
Yep.
Napoleon can now resume his siege of Mantua, the key to Italy.
And as we covered last time and throughout this series, Mantua is really the key, as they put it, to this region of northern Italy, or Austrian-dominated Italy. Remember, we talked about this before. A lot of this land was technically controlled by independent Italian states, but in reality, it was under the sway of Austria, right? Austria had a lot of power in this region, and Mantua was sort of the center of this Austrian power, at least in a military sense, not necessarily in a social or political sense, but in a military sense at this point. This is the Austrian foothold in the region, which is why it's so important for Napoleon to take it down.
But he'll have to start over. The Austrians have used the interlude to drag away his heavy guns and demolish his siege works. In summer, the pestilential marshes that surround the city are lethal. The Austrian garrison has been decimated by disease, mostly malaria. General Serrurier, commanding the French siege, also contracts the disease. He returns to France to recover and is replaced by General Sauge. Sickness and a shortage of equipment once more plague the French army in Italy. Even the heroic General Massena asks to be replaced.
Wow. And I mean, look, we've seen throughout this entire campaign, Napoleon has not gotten the manpower or the resources that he needs. I mean, I just mentioned it. This Italian campaign, this front of the war, is not the most important theater. Plus, the French Republic is pretty strapped for resources, right? They are doing what they can, but if they have those resources, they feel they're better sending them, to the Rhine than they are to Italy, which is just not as important. And so Napoleon has really been struggling to keep his army going, keep it supplied, even have enough men. I mean, he's been outnumbered many times by the Austrians because of that lack of manpower. And as you can see, the French are fighting in some pretty tough conditions here. Also, the Austrians are.
Fighting ill health and exhaustion. Napoleon rejects his request.
I mean, at this point, Massena is really an invaluable person to have on hand. Massena is someone who has a career outside of Napoleon. Now, in the long run, Massena will be remembered for serving under Napoleon, being one of Napoleon's marshals, but Massena has his own independent career. He is talented, he is a good commander, even separate from Napoleon, especially at this point earlier in his career, and so Napoleon really needs someone like that at hand.
Despite these problems, the Directory in Paris orders Napoleon to attack as part of a grand strategic offensive against Austria. He is to break through to Innsbruck, join forces with Moreau's Army of the Rhine, then together invade Austria and force Emperor Francis to sue for peace.
And now you can see Napoleon's sort of being more brought into the big picture. I mean, up until this point, he's supposed to be contesting Austrian control of northern Italy. But now the plan is for him to move north, meet up with Moreau, and then, they will do the main offensive against the Austrians. So not only has Napoleon made himself more important, but the plans of the Directory are sort of bringing him in more as well.
Napoleon faces an enemy of roughly equal size. So he plans to use speed and concentration of force to fall upon Austrian troops in the Adige Valley and clear the path northwards. His opponent, Austrian Field Marshal von Wurmser, is under immense pressure to relieve Mantua.
Yeah.
His staff believe that recent fighting has left the French army shattered.
I wouldn't underestimate the French army. This is a tough group of fellas, and they've got a lot of motivation, especially compared to the other armies of this era. And we saw last time that von Wurmser, though he may not have performed super well against Napoleon, especially in that last battle we saw, he was more formidable than Beaulieu, right? This is a more formidable opponent from the Austrian side than Napoleon has had to fight up until this point. That is not to give too much credit to Wurmser, but he's not a complete fool. I'll put it that way. He's not completely incompetent. He does know what he's doing, even if he's a bit stuck in the past, and we're going to see him make plenty of bad calls. And we have seen him make plenty of bad calls already.
And incapable of offensive operations. So, the Austrians plan to make their own advance. Rather than try to force his way past French troops in the Adige Valley, Wurmser will keep Davidovich in a defensive role, while he leads a wide outflanking march via the Brenta Valley and Bassano to reach Mantua from the east.
All right, and as we can see, first off, it's all about getting back to Mantua. This is a really important Austrian stronghold, as we've covered. It's also all about maneuver at this point. We've seen that really the maneuverability of these armies is super important to their overall success.
There he will link up with its garrison. And when Napoleon comes south to face him, he will be caught between two Austrian armies.
Okay. I mean, they've tried to catch Napoleon out before, and it has not worked. But maybe it will this time, you never know.
This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream, the best place to discover documentaries on history, science, technology, and much more. CuriosityStream hosts a vast collection of exclusive...
I'll mute this for now, I'll let it play through, but, go and check out this video by Epic History TV. They put so much work into it. It's such fantastic content. I'll have their video linked down in my description. Please go check it out. Give them a like, subscribe, and check out their sponsor. Please show them support for making all this fantastic content. And I'll let the ad play through.
Black Sea Rex, which covers the recent jaw-dropping discovery of amazingly preserved shipwrecks from antiquity.
Ooh.
This is a brilliant service for anyone who's thirsty for knowledge, and it's available worldwide and on all your favorite streaming devices. Go to curiositystream.com/epiccuriosity.
All right, check out that link, everybody.
For unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction series. Use promo code EPICCuriosity to save 25% on what's already one of the best deals in streaming. So click the link below or go to curiositystream.com/epiccuriosity.
And hey, while you're at it, check out their stuff. I would appreciate it if once again you would check out my Patreon, linked in the description, and you can get exclusive content, including full unedited reactions to TV shows like HBO's Rome that I can't put up on YouTube. Anyway, they've done their ed, I've done mine. Back to the content.
Save 25% now. Thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video.
I doubt if Bonaparte had command of the Austrian forces, he could have contrived it better for his own purposes. Okay. Interesting observation from a British observer.
The Austrians begin their advance on the 1st of September. French forces begin their advance the following day. Massena pushes up the Adige Valley, with Augereau taking a tougher, mountainous route on his right. General Vaubois marches around Lake Garda to join them, with one brigade crossing by boat. The forward Austrian outposts are driven in, and by the 4th, 3 French divisions are converging on Davidovich's heavily outnumbered force, near Rovereto. General Victor leads the main attack straight up the road.
I mean, the idea is for Wurmser to draw Napoleon back down to Mantua, but if Napoleon can steamroll through the other Austrian forces, then that plan sort of starts to fall apart.
Driving back the enemy center. Meanwhile, French light infantry swarm up the sides of the valley to outflank the enemy. It's a tactic the French will use again and again to force the Austrians out of strong positions in the narrow passes.
Well, the French, though we've seen the manpower is fairly even, like I said, these are some motivated, inspired soldiers. The French Republic Though a lot of the promise of the French Revolution has already sort of fallen apart. We had the violence of the Reign of Terror and the revolt in the Vendée, and now the Directory is in power, which is a rather, you could say, cynical, practical government. A lot of the men in these French armies still believe in at least some of the promise of the revolution. It still is, in some ways, this sort of citizen soldier army. And so, like I said, especially at this point, you will see a lot of motivation, a lot of high morale amongst the French soldiers. They have this sense of purpose, they have a sense of nationalism, which at this point is pretty early for that developing sense of nationalism. And that means that in a lot of these battles, what the French do is just send their men in to push forward. And these French soldiers are willing to put their lives at risk and push harder and faster than basically any other force throughout Europe. And I think this is probably an example of that.
The Austrians are driven up the valley towards Davidovich's main camp at Caliano. As Napoleon remarks, this position should have been impregnable. Sheer mountains either side of a valley floor that's just a few hundred yards wide. A small castle and wall add to the formidable natural defenses.
Yeah, a pretty strong natural defensive position for the Austrians. Should have been impregnable. Let's see why it wasn't.
But its defense has been left to a single, shaken Austrian regiment, which is given no time to prepare. When the French hit them with speed and numbers, they give way. Massena's troops break through to the main Austrian camp, where soldiers, expecting a much longer respite, are preparing dinner. The arrival of the...
And as we've seen for a lot of the French armies in general, but especially under Napoleon, the speed that they operate at and how decisive Napoleon is, all of this put together, how quickly he makes decisions, how quickly his army operates, how quickly they can get to the Austrians, all of this, the maneuverability, the speed, he manages to catch the Austrians off guard time and time again. They are just not quick enough, or they don't expect the French to act so quickly. And this has been really bad for the Austrians throughout this entire campaign so far.
The French sparks chaos and confusion. The Austrian escape route is immediately jammed with fleeing troops, wagons and guns. The French round up around 3,000 prisoners, alongside 25 guns and 7 standards.
Yep, and those are some significant numbers, considering the size of the armies we're talking about here.
Napoleon had thought that he faced the whole Austrian army around Trento.
And once again, remember the original plan. Sort of hold Napoleon off up north, Wurmser will head back down to Mantua, draw him back in, and we'll get him in a pincer move. What do we have now? Well, Napoleon is pushed all the way north. He's pushing Davidovich back quite a bit. Davidovich is losing these battles pretty badly, and Wurmser is a bit to the east. So this is not really in line with the Austrian plan.
But now, speaking with prisoners and locals, he learns that Wurmser and half his army have set off down the Brenta Valley. Destination unknown. With typical speed and decisiveness, Napoleon tears up the plan to join Moreau at Innsbruck and orders a pursuit. If he can catch and destroy Wurmser before he reaches safety, the war in Italy will be won.
There you go. And so Napoleon sees what's happening, doesn't entirely know the Austrian plan, but as always, acts decisively. If he's successful, he will completely ruin that Austrian plan. Of course, there's still a chance that, Napoleon is dominating Davidovich, but Wurmser could still reach Mantua, relieve the garrison, and then Napoleon's in trouble again. I mean, that's been one of the main challenges of this campaign for Napoleon, is taking Mantua. It is this really strong, tough, fortified outpost of Austrian power. And so if Wurmser can make it there and he can relieve them, that's not good at all for Napoleon. that's a bad position for him to be in, even if he's been winning all these battles. And so Napoleon says, you know what, screw the original plan. Even if it's given to him by the higher-ups, this is a very Napoleon thing to do. He says, I'm not doing that. I'm going with my instinct, my intuition, and we are moving as quickly as possible to pursue Wurmser. You know, you wouldn't expect anything less from Napoleon here. On the 8th, I shall be at Bassano. If the enemy waits for me, there will be a battle which will decide the fate of this whole country. And that's Napoleon writing to the Directory, perhaps explaining why he's not heading north to meet up with Innsbruck.
When Wurmser receives news of the fiasco at Caliano, his troops are already strung out along the Brenta Valley, with his vanguard approaching Vicenza. There is nothing to gain by turning back. He orders Davidovich to hold the passes north, assuming they are Napoleon's objective, and pushes on to Mantua.
Okay.
But Napoleon is not going north. He orders Vaubois to pursue Davidovich and keep him blocked in, while Augereau's division leads the rest of the army down the narrow, funnel-like Brenta Valley in pursuit of the Austrians. The army of Italy is brimming with confidence and momentum, and marches much faster than the Austrians.
Yup. I mean, it's that speed and maneuverability we've seen time and time before. We're seeing it once again. And, you know, I think Wurmser... I guess you could ask the question, should Wurmser have turned back to fight Napoleon? I think maybe not. I still think the plan for him to go back to Mantua is a good one, given how important that position is. It's just now he risks Napoleon catching up, which I reckon he's about to do. Or maybe not about, but he's going to do.
A small force at Levico offers token resistance before it's bundled down the Brenta Valley. The next day, French light infantry rout a 3,000-strong Austrian rearguard at Primulano, taking most of them prisoner. Wurmser decides to make another stand at Bassano, where the valley opens into flat plains. With Colonel Lannes leading the charge, the Austrians are driven back, then chased into town by Murat's cavalry. Amid panic, chaos, and blocked roads, the French take another 2,000 prisoners, including an Austrian general and 30 guns.
Yep, pretty significant number of guns. We've seen 3,000 Austrians, 2,600 Austrians. These numbers are really, really adding up. Napoleon is now either killing or capturing a fairly significant number of Austrian soldiers. Like I said, given the size of the entire army, Wurmser has made another stand. It hasn't gone well for him. Now he's got a choice to make. Do I keep basically, at this point, fleeing south until I get to Mantua? That was the original objective. Of course, this whole thing has fallen apart because Napoleon is way faster than him. He's been able to catch up. Wurmser is under a lot of pressure, risks, regardless of what he does, frankly.
Wurmser is in disarray, down to 12,000 men, outnumbered 2-1, with part of his force retreating in the wrong direction towards Trieste.
Oh no, look at him now, probably. I mean, any decision Wurmser could have made at this point would probably have been a bad one, but look at his army, split into several parts. Gvozdanovich has retreated in the wrong direction, his forces are in disarray. This is going terribly. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, Wurmser is not necessarily incompetent. You know, he's more competent than Beaulieu, right, who came before, but Wurmser is, first off, he's stuck in the past a little bit. He's an older fella. He's not ready for this new type of warfare. But to be fair, nobody is. No one's ready for Napoleon. No one's as fast as him. No one's ready for his tactics, his strategy. So, I mean, really, you could have put almost anybody in that position, and they would have had a hard time standing up to Napoleon. But Wurmser in particular, though I think he is sort of generally competent, he is not ready for what's happening.
His only hope is to reach Mantua. The two armies are in a foot race. But for the first time in the campaign, Austrian soldiers outmarch their exhausted French counterparts.
Yeah, the French would be exhausted given all the marching they've done. The Austrians have had at least a bit of time. Plus, I'm sure at this point, a lot of the Austrians are fueled by absolute desperation. It's really life or death. I mean, not only is the plan at risk, I mean, the plan's fallen apart, but they're trying to reach Mantua to save themselves. So I'm sure, that march is fueled by desperation as well.
Wurmser leaves a small garrison at the fortress of Legnago to slow Augereau's pursuit. Forging ahead, Massena manages to block the Austrians' path at Cherea. But General Ott makes a determined attack and clears the road, taking 700 French prisoners and 7 guns.
Wow, okay.
It is a rare defeat for Massena.
I was going to say, a rare Austrian victory. Not on a super big scale, but that was fairly significant and, significant to the broader conflict. So, hey, a W for the Austrians. I'll give it to them if they win it. I'm not trying to hate on the Austrians. Of course, it's easy to do so when you have Napoleon on the other side, a very impressive figure. But, if the Austrians win, there you go. And that looks like it might clear the way for them to head towards Mantua. Of course, they still have more French troops in between them and Mantua, but if they can make it through them, then maybe they'll have a chance.
With the help of a local informant, Wurmser then finds an intact, unguarded bridge across the Tiorne River and reaches the outskirts of Mantua on the 13th of September.
Wow, okay then.
His army has been saved from destruction.
It
By the
has.
skin of its teeth.
Just barely. They've lost a bunch of battles along the way. Wurmser has just barely managed to save his army, which is very good for him. He's reinforcing Mantua. I would say, I'm not sure if the Austrians are really in a fantastic position. I mean, they've still been cleared out of most of northern Italy, and they're really contained to this one fortress. So overall, it's not like the Austrians are doing great, but in the short term, Wurmser has just barely managed to save himself and his army. What soldier could fail to admire the gallant old Wurmser, never depressed by defeat, who, having been hunted from the Brenta to Mantua, now stood in front of the garrison, determined to cut his way back. A British military historian, a lot of British observers here. I think that's fair, I try to give Wurmser the credit he's due. To be fair, in the last episode, we saw some mistakes from him, and I feel like we saw that never depressed by defeat. That was not necessarily true. He certainly was depressed by defeat at times, but you gotta give him credit at least for the effort he's making.
Napoleon has failed to prevent Wurmser reaching Mantua. But he knows that if he can bottle him up inside the city, it will put intolerable strain on its supplies.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, Napoleon's failed to prevent Wurmser from reaching the city, but overall, the situation hasn't really changed much. Like I said, the Austrians still don't have too much of a presence in the area apart from Mantua. Mantua is still the key to northern Italy, and if Napoleon can restart his siege, bottle them up, trap them within the city, then we're basically back to where we were. Napoleon besieging Mantua, the Austrians can't last forever. So, the situation hasn't changed too much, really.
For that reason, Wurmser wants to keep his army outside the city walls, free to maneuver, and, crucially, forage for supplies in the surrounding country.
That makes sense.
The next morning, as Augereau accepts the surrender of the Austrian garrison at Legnago, Massena tries a surprise attack at Due Castelli. But it's overambitious. His men have not had time to recover from their long march, and the Austrians fight bravely. The following day, Napoleon launches a much larger, coordinated attack. Sauge's division advances on the right. His troops are soon in heavy fighting with Ott's brigade.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we've seen the Austrians lose a lot of battles up until this point. We've seen the Austrians do a lot of retreating, a lot of tactical retreats, right? And to be fair, if you're getting absolutely smoked, it might be better to retreat to fight another day than to let yourself be killed on the battlefield. But at this point, the Austrians, their back is up against the wall, proverbially. And literally, they really have nowhere to go. I mean, they could try and break out and escape north maybe, but they'll probably get hunted down by Napoleon. They've retreated to a place of safety, Mantua, and they're really going to have to fight for their lives at this point. So I think we might see some more fierce fighting from the Austrians than we've seen up to this point.
Around the Villa La Favorita, Augereau's division, under temporary command of General Bonn, advances along the Mincio River, trying to turn the Austrian right flank. When Wurmser sends reserves from his center to strengthen both flanks, Massena's concealed division launches its attack.
Nice.
Victor and Rampont lead the way with their veteran demi-brigades.
And by the way, we're seeing a lot of names. Lannes, Augereau, Massena, who will become very important in what you might call Napoleonic history. They'll become very famous subordinates of Napoleon's. But I think at this point we can really see, and I mentioned this earlier, I want to reiterate, that Massena is really distinguishing himself. And that's because, like I said, he was already distinguished before this campaign. This is someone who, he would make his fortune with Napoleon, but Napoleon had a lot of men who would rise up to the top, to the rank of marshal, or even below that, who really started under him. They hadn't been anything before they served under Napoleon, or, they hadn't done anything too great, even if they were already talented and skilled. Massena was a man who had already made something of himself. We knew that he was suited for this sort of command. We saw that in the first episode. And so, we're sort of seeing that talent put to work here. Now, not to say that he's perfect, he certainly makes mistakes, and we can sort of see, I think, a degeneration of Massena's leadership throughout his career, but I think really earlier on, especially in this campaign, we can sort of see some of the highlights of Massena's leadership, like here, and throughout the series.
Austrian cavalry hurl themselves at the French, but are beaten off. Heavy fighting rages on the outskirts of Mantua for much of the afternoon. Finally, Wurmser's center begins to crumble, and the French take San Giorgio. Much of the Austrian right wing is cut off. Many are forced to surrender, while others flee into the lake. With the Austrian line shattered, Wurmser orders his men to fall back to the safety of Mantua's citadel.
All right. Once again, a fairly significant number of Austrian casualties, but we are now also seeing the French casualties climbing. Now, 2,500 to 1,000, still way more Austrian casualties, but 1,000, that's not insignificant, and you can imagine, if this fighting keeps up, if the Austrians retreat to the citadel, there's going to be more and more French casualties on the horizon.
The troops that were to have rescued Mantua are now trapped alongside its garrison. By early October, the French have cut off the city and resumed their siege. Conditions inside Mantua deteriorate rapidly.
And now we really are back to where we were, the French besieging Mantua again. Of course, the Austrians have reinforced, but, if you're low on resources, there's not much you can really do at that point. And as they said, the situation is degenerating within the city.
Disease, wounds, and malnutrition kill, on average, nearly 100 Austrian soldiers every day for 6 weeks. Civilian.
Yeah, that's horrible. I mean, we saw the French lost, or the French had 1,000 casualties in that last battle. The Austrians are losing about 100 a day. That is, full week, 7 days, 700 every week, almost 1,000 for 6 weeks straight. That is massively, massively destructive, frankly, catastrophic to the Austrian forces. This is a terrible position to be in.
Austrians are reduced to eating rats and horses. Napoleon, meanwhile, returns to Milan, sending his aide-de-camp, Major Marmont, to Paris to present 22 captured Austrian standards.
So Napoleon feels like he's already won, retreating to his palace back in Milan. I talked about how Mantua is sort of the military center of this region, sort of the cultural, social, political capital or center of this area is Milan. Very important city, historic city. I'm sure Napoleon felt very important being there. And I also we see this painting of Napoleon. We get sort of two versions of Napoleon in popular culture. There's either, young, energetic, quick, skinny, long-haired young Napoleon, or it's short, stout, sort of chubby, dour, older Napoleon. It's either one of those two, nothing in between, according to how our sort of popular culture views the man.
To the Directory. But elsewhere, the war has not been going so well for France.
Uh-oh.
Archduke Charles, younger brother of the Emperor Francis, has defeated General Jourdan's army twice in...
And Archduke Charles was a fairly talented fellow. He was a pretty formidable Austrian foe to the French, Now look, the French revolutionary armies were pretty revolutionary, for lack of a better word. They were debuting a lot of new ideas, new strategies, new tactics, but of course Napoleon was so far ahead of everybody else, so far ahead of the other French generals. Guys like Jourdan and Moreau, regardless of how talented they were or not talented they were, couldn't measure up to what Napoleon did and what Napoleon would become. And so they can face someone like Archduke Charles, and who, to be fair, is very competent and talented in his own right, and he can put up a pretty impressive fight and start to push things in the other direction.
2 weeks. It and General Moreau's army of the Rhine are forced to retreat back to the frontier. These setbacks mean Napoleon will get very few of the reinforcements he's so urgently requested.
Of course.
He and his men are exhausted.
Yeah, 3,000 after a request for 25,000, not nearly enough. Though, he hasn't really been getting a whole lot of reinforcements and resources so far anyway. He's had to do without them, though of course, I'm sure these reinforcements would be key if he could get those 25,000 soldiers that he wants and really needs at this point. But he's going to have to work without them.
Many of them are sick. They must contain an enormous and increasingly desperate garrison in Mantua, with the certain knowledge that the Austrians will try again soon to save the city.
Oh yeah, and now the French Revolutionary Wars are going a little worse for France up north by the Rhine. Of course, there's a risk that the Austrians send more reinforcements or send a larger army down south into Italy to push Napoleon out. So, of course, Wurmser and the Austrians, this massive, at this point, Austrian garrison trapped at Mantua, they are in a terrible, terrible situation. Napoleon has the upper hand, but he's in a risky, risky spot. He has to keep the siege up around Mantua. He has to defend against the Austrian forces in the field right now. And I'm sure he's worrying that the Austrians could be sending more men down in the future.
And there are diplomatic concerns, which also trouble Napoleon.
Uh-oh.
In Rome, the Pope stirs animosity against the French, citing their treatment of the Catholic Church in the territories they administer.
Yeah, well, the French Revolution and the revolutionary governments would have an absolutely terrible relationship with the Catholic Church. I mean, the French Revolution was very secular in nature, and you could also call it anti-religious, or at least anti-Catholic. It viewed a lot of these Catholic beliefs as superstition and wanted to rid them in favor of reason. You know, we see the cult of the Supreme Being, the cult of reason pop up, but on a more concrete level than that. For example, the French revolutionary government seize a lot of church land and sell it to people at cost. So a lot of these new bourgeois figures are buying up this former church land, making them very wealthy. We see the rise of this bourgeois class, this middle class. But, of course, the church and any faithful Catholics are very displeased about this. And the bad relations with the church just continue. In fact, Napoleon, when he gets into power much later than this, is the one who tries to moderate relations a bit more with the Catholic Church.
These now include the Cispadane Republic, formed in part from the Duchy of Modena, which Napoleon has abolished for colluding with the enemy. There is also the lingering threat that Naples may rejoin the war at a critical moment to stab him in the back. So, to secure his southern flank, Napoleon concludes a comprehensive peace treaty with Naples without bothering to consult the Directory.
Yeah, and, we've sort of seen throughout this series Napoleon acting rather independently. And look, for a general in the field, it is important to have a certain degree of independence, right? You need to act quickly, and you can't always be referring back to your central government. But Napoleon makes real big decisions without the permission of the Directory, without the permission of the central government. And we can already see at this point, and if you read Napoleon's personal letters, his writings, or, read the anecdotes of anybody who talked to Napoleon at this time, we already know that he sees himself as more than just a conquering general. He's already seeing himself as this conquering figure, this leader of men, this political figure, and we can sort of see that in many ways in how he acts.
It's actions like this that feed the whispers in Paris. This popular young general's ambition seems limitless.
Yeah.
Might he not one day prove a dangerous political player?
Yeah, absolutely. And like they're saying, this is not necessarily a secret. Napoleon does things like making these treaties, acting independently, and like I said, if we read anything he's left behind, he's pretty clear about how he saw himself. He had a very inflated view of himself, a massive ego, though perhaps it is deserved. And yeah, he appeared as a risk to those in power in Paris, in the Directory. They saw him, and not only did they see this impressive and successful general, but they saw a political threat. And, as we know, they were right to do so. They were exactly right. He was a political threat.
But such talk will be moot if Napoleon fails in Italy. That autumn, as Austrian troops march once more to the relief of Mantua, he will face his most skilled opponent yet, Feldzugmeister Joseph Alvinci, the first man to defeat Napoleon Bonaparte in battle.
Oh my, the Austrian opponents Napoleon faces just keep leveling up.
A big thank you to PMF Productions for...
Thank you to PMF Productions. That was great. Yeah, the Austrian opponents keep leveling up. We had Bollio, then Wurmser, and now this third guy. I guess we'll see what happens next time. I thought this was another excellent episode. I mean, do I even have to say it at this point? It feels redundant. Every video by Epic History TV, especially their videos on Napoleon, are of the highest quality. They're engaging, they're entertaining, just fantastic, fantastic content. So I had a great time watching this one. I hope you guys did. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye.